Hi, my name is Vivian, and I am currently a senior undergraduate student at Cornell University. My major is biology and society. So right now, this is a collaboration between the news department, the news and careers department, and the development department of JYI, and we are collabing with this field knowledge series as an enrichment program um, to introduce undergraduates about the professional world of science, communication, and journalism. And our our expert today is Maggie Chen. So Maggie Chen, yeah, I believe you have several published works in certain outlets such as Wired, Biospace, and the New York Times. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie. I graduated in 2022 from Harvard College with a degree in biology and the history of science. I'm currently a scientist and also a science journalist. And I used to be the chief development officer at JYI. So it is such a pleasure to be back with this amazing organization today.
So Maggie, what are your current, what's your do you have any current articles you're working on right now?
Yeah, I do. I'm still a contributing writer for Wired, which is incredibly exciting. And so I'm still writing for them. Stay tuned for some cool stuff coming out on a recent book that will be out, which I can't talk about yet, but will be out soon, as well as some more cool science articles. So I think there's a lot to look forward to. The one that I'm currently working on, the article I'm currently writing, is on neuroscience. So not an area that I have a lot of personal experience with, but definitely a really fascinating topic. So I'm very excited to have that out in the world in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So if you don't mind me asking, what drew you into science journalism in particular? I feel like a lot of people don't are usually just into journalism, and then when they hear about science journalism, it's kind of unique. So I don't know, how did you get into that field?
Mm. For me, I have always been trained as a research scientist. So I always knew that I wanted to do research, to explore scientific questions. And I started working in a lab really early. So I knew that I really, really loved research. And then when I got to college, I think the year that the pandemic hit, so 2020, the summer of 2020, I was sitting at home and I wasn't able to go back to the lab because I was at home. And I was thinking, what can I do? What can I do now that I couldn't do before, didn't know about before? And I just started reading a lot. And I think during the pandemic too, especially, we learned a lot about the importance of journalism and especially scientific journalism because journalists were explaining these really technical and complicated concepts, like how a virus works, how COVID works, right? Like how do masks help with filtration? And all of that knowledge was so incredibly important for just the general public to understand what was going on. I think that really spurred me to try and understand the field at large and spurred me to try and find opportunities to practice science journalism because I think before for me I hadn't really even understood that science journalism was this amazing field that it combined writing, which I'd always loved, and also science. So to find that those two kind of enmesh together, I think was really wonderful. And yeah, through organizations like JYI and other science writing organizations, I was able to gain a lot more firsthand experience writing and reporting, and just found that I really loved it. I loved being able to communicate science in a way that was understandable and digestible to anybody, because I really think that anybody should be able to understand and appreciate science. And so that's really how I got started. And I've just been working ever since then. And it's been a wonderful journey, one that I was, albeit very surprised to see myself on. So I always thought I would be a research scientist, but one that I really cannot express how grateful I am for this chance to do this and to be a science journalist. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, that sounds great. It sounds like 2020 was really a turning point for many people, especially like maybe the scientific community in particular, because suddenly all the scientific knowledge was kind of on display for the world to see and for the general public to interpret suddenly. Um, so you mentioned that you kind of transitioned into journalism while you were an undergraduate. Um, so how did you kind of go from journalism as an undergraduate and turn it into a job?
Well, Phoebe, it was always kind of a job from the beginning, honestly. Just because I think for me, I started really doing science journalism work by freelancing. And so I started really, the first article that I ever wrote was actually based on a history of science paper that I written for one of my undergraduate classes, a history of physics class. And it was on this amazing physicist. Her name was Dr. Frida Saltzman. And the article really focused on the nepotism that really hindered her career during the time that she was alive. And it was really an incredible thing to research because I got to dive very deeply into the archives. And I pitched that to an outlet called Lady Science, and they were kind enough to accept an article from someone with no experience. So I'm incredibly grateful to them for that. And then I just started working. I started freelancing. I started writing for Biospace, covering biotechnology and bioengineering research, and then just kept on looking for opportunities to write more. And this summer was able to do the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship, where I was placed at Wired as a full-time staff writer, or as an intern, but working as a full-time writer, and I'm continuing along with them as a contributing writer. So for the job, always been, I think, a very enjoyable thing. I've really loved science writing and I've really loved reporting. And I think that at the end of the day is what makes people understand a topic that you really love. And I think that's pretty cool.
Mhm. How did you feel when you I don't know, got the internship at Y?
I was blown away. I think I've read Wired since I was very young, and just to get the chance to not only learn from but also work with editors and writers who I've looked up to and followed for so long, I really thought that was a once in a lifetime opportunity. So that was very, very special.
Mhm. Um, do you think there was anything really that stuck out to you, maybe on like the first day when you met someone from Wired? Maybe in how they wrote or how they kind of how I don't know how they wrote their articles.
I think for me, what I'm always astounded by, not like astounded as in I'm surprised by it, but more astounded as in I'm very grateful for it, was just how generous everybody was. I think that, everything can be competitive, whether it's research or journalism or whatever. I've always just loved at Wired and elsewhere, at Biospace and in all of my jobs. I think I've been very, very lucky to be surrounded by people who are so generous with their time, who are willing to answer questions, willing to offer help. And so they were generous with their time and were just so very kind. Really wanted to see other people succeed. I think that is very special. I think for me, I've been very fortunate to have mentors who are just very nice, genuine people. And I think that is something that I feel like I wish everybody had that sort of chance. And so I hope that I can provide that sort of mentorship to other people in the future if I'm able to. But I don't know, I feel like working at Wire just made me realize that, just because a place is a large organization, it's a very large and prestigious organization, that doesn't mean that, it's scary. It doesn't have to be scary. So I think what I learned from working at Wired is that it's really a place filled with people who are so willing to give their time and also so willing to talk about their experiences and offer mentorship and offer opportunities. I think at the end of the day, that made me realize, oh, like this is who I want to be, like who I want to emulate later in the future. I want to emulate that similar manner of generosity in terms of students. So I think that's one of the critical things that I learned.
Mhm. I definitely agree that maybe having a good kind of help contribute to the workspace environment overall. Definitely. Um, you mentioned before that you were originally more into research than journalism. I don't know, does that mean that maybe you have a specific field within science you specialize in or prefer? Or are you kind of more of a generalist now?
I don't think I will ever stop being a scientist. I think that is who I was and who I am first and foremost as a researcher. I've always loved bioengineering. I think to build essentially like living machines, I think that is just something that is so powerful and so fascinating. So just personally, I love following bioengineering. But I think training as a biologist all of those years in college made me really appreciate basic science. And so I think that I tend to look at it from like the best of both worlds standpoint, where I appreciate both. I think they kind of feed into each other. And so I think it's really, really cool, honestly, from a journalist perspective, because I think from a scientist perspective, you see things at a little bit of a more narrower scale where you're really focused on bringing this one project to completion. You're trying to answer one or maybe two or three scientific questions, right, through your research project. Whether it's like, what does this protein do in the body and during disease? Or, what if I turn this gene on? What will happen? And as a journalist, you get a picture view. So it's more of like a bird's eye view. And you kind of see, okay, the project has been done essentially, and it's become a paper. So what's next? And also you can ask the question of what came before, right? Like what led to this project and then what comes after the project. So you get a little bit of a broader view and you don't see as many of the details. I think that doing science journalism, at least for me coming from a research background, it made me appreciate melding both views together. So being able to appreciate all of the minute details and all of the work that went into the optimizing of the experiments and the procedures, but also being able to see, oh, okay, I can look at it from a bigger picture perspective and also like put it into perspective and to put this project in context of the bigger picture of science, and kind of just see where that project falls. So this like jumping between both and also trying to make both perspectives and views work together. And I think that I think for me, being a scientist and also becoming a journalist, that's been something that I didn't really expect. I was kind of surprised by, but that I've also really loved because it's afforded me such a richer view of science as a whole.
Mhm. Yeah. Actually, for me personally, I also work in a genetics research lab. Like they specialized in CRISPR and Cas9 genetics for butterflies.
Mhm.
Um, and so when I wrote my first research paper for JY, or not research paper, when I wrote my first journal article for JYI, I was kind of stunned by how much more thinking I had to do from like a different perspective. Because I don't know, I think when you talk to someone else who understands all the technical scientific jargon, you can be like, oh, you just add this enzyme and you add just this Cas9 and it puts up the DNA. But then suddenly when you're having to write an article, now you have to explain what Cas9 is. You have to explain what an enzyme is and how it affects the DNA. That kind of like turned me on my head a little bit
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I've never had to do that. Yeah. Um, uh, do you ever experience like writer's block sometimes? And like if you do, how do you deal with it?
Well, I think for me, it was more about figuring out what works for me in terms of my writing style, like timelines, things like that. I found that I write really well in the morning. So if I'm chasing a deadline, I will wake up really early and just write. And I found out that I don't really write well at night. So I'll just try to avoid, writing during the evening or when it gets really late. And I think that's helped me avoid writer's block because I kind of inherently know what my weaknesses are. But yeah, everybody gets writer's block. It's such a normal thing. And I think, sometimes you just have to take a breather and step away. I've definitely done that before, but for me, I think it was more just about figuring out, okay, which strategy works best for me and just going at that, using that strategy. And that's helped.
Mhm. Yeah, so I guess that kind of ties in with maybe keeping with your deadlines, since you know that they come up maybe if you see some sort of pattern forming within your writing. I guess that can help like
Yeah.
avoid kind of these time crunch situations.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Mhm.
Another thing I've also realized is that it's perfectly fine to ask for help or to ask for extensions. Life happens. Life literally always happens. And I've realized that people are generally very understanding and very empathetic. And so for me, one of the greatest lessons that I learned this summer was, oh, hey, like if I really need time, I'm not trying to shirk a deadline or something, but if I really need time, if I really need a break or a breather, it's okay to at least try and ask. And I think I didn't really realize that was a thing in college. I wish I'd learned that lesson sooner, but I think it's a really important thing to kind of verbalize sometimes that, yeah, you can ask for help or time if you need it.
Yeah. Um, so for those who maybe haven't started or really gotten into this field yet, like science journalism, but are interested, I don't know, what do you think is a pretty good starting point for this maybe career path or maybe general interest?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that I definitely asked a lot of people myself was starting. I think one of the biggest things is to read as much science journalism as you can. Find your favorite authors. When I was just starting out, I read so much Ed Yong, and that was kind of during his height of his Pulitzer Prize winning coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so just being able to read those articles in real time, it taught me so much because really sitting there and dissecting an article, you learn not just about how someone writes, but also about the structure, about the syntax, about the imagery, about all of the little kind of like bells and whistles, embellishments in the prose. And I think that honestly teaches you so much, just as much as a writing class could teach you. That is one thing, just reading as much as possible. I think another thing else is being able to ask for help, asking mentors, asking connections, joining professional organizations. I'm based in the US, so I was able to join the National Association of Science Writers. And that just really broadened the scope of opportunities that I was able to find because it was very much a centralized sort of depot where there were people posting job opportunities, there were mentorship programs. And so that was, again, a very powerful thing. JYI, also another great resource, just a student run organization that is focused on science communication and research publishing. So just going out there, really putting yourself out there and looking for those opportunities, I think that is really paramount. So yeah, I would say those two things. First is reading a lot of good science journalism and figuring out why it's good. And the second is just putting yourself out there and trying to find organizations that support your interests.
Um, so do you think that this field, like science journalism and science communication, since you entered this field, uh, do you think there's anything, I don't know, unique about it that maybe other professions might not necessarily have that you're kind of surprised when you got into this?
Well, I would rephrase the question as I don't know if this is unique to science journalism as a singular thing, but what I have loved every single day since becoming a science journalist and doing this job is how I will never stop learning because every article that I write, every paper that I read, every single day, I'm learning something new. In research, I think very much become an expert in one key field, one key area. But as a science journalist, you get to learn so much about everything. Like I have written about polar bear genomics of all things. I've written about slime. I've written about sea cucumbers. I've written about COVID, obviously. Like there's just the breadth of everything that you get to experience and get to learn. And the breadth of the experts that you get to talk to, the people that you get to talk to, that is such a privilege because you literally get to go out and ask people who are the best in their fields to talk about their work on a one-to-one basis. I think that's incredibly special. And that's something that I will try to never take for granted. And I think something that journalism has in spades. Number one is just, learning so much every day. You never really get bored because there's always something new to cover. The other thing is just being able to have this opportunity to talk to really cool people, really cool scientists who are so open with their time and so willing to tell their stories. I think it's not only a privilege to do this, but it's also a really big responsibility because you want to tell people's stories in a way that is truthful and also empathetic to the situation. So I think being afforded that privilege, being afforded that responsibility, that's again very special, and I have loved it ever since I started.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, I do realize that I've learned a lot since joining JYI, and like a lot of fields I really didn't think I would. And I have also thought about I don't know, I feel like if you got a whole bunch of science journalists together, you could probably win a trivia night pretty easily.
Yeah, exactly. Jack of all trades, I think is the saying,
Yeah,
right?
I think I don't know, I was kind of stunned myself when I saw like uh, a trivia question on like coffee, and I was reading an article about coffee, and it was
Yeah,
asking, oh, which country has like drinks the most coffee like per capita? And I was just like, I know this
yeah,
because I had to like, look up the statistics about this like 2 nights ago.
exactly,
But yeah,
exactly.
that's the way it's Finland.
Exactly, right? Another plus of being a science journalist is you get really good at trivia.
Yeah. Do you I don't know, with this as kind of your job, or your main profession, do you by any chance have like, I don't know, other hobbies that you, I don't know, find you're interested in or have time for? Um,
So I will say this is not my full-time job. So I'm actually a graduate student. So I am a full-time student. I will be getting my MD PhD. So I will eventually become a physician scientist, hopefully. But journalism is something that I think is I will keep in my life forever. And I think it's something that you can do while also being a scientist or being a physician. I think that's the really wonderful thing about that. You see a lot of really amazing writers who do both, like Atul Gawande, one of the most famous physician writers, and also a lot of really amazing scientist writers. Ed Young is one of. I think that for me, writing is kind of my way to relax. So that kind of worked itself out nicely. But I think it's also important, definitely, to have other hobbies. And just to have sort of outlets outside of work to relax and spend time with loved ones, read a book, do something fun. So I definitely try to incorporate that as well. But yeah, days are busy, but days are very fulfilling.
yeah, I think that's what most people want in their life, to be busy, but also to be fulfilled.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. Do you have any, I don't know, tips and tricks that maybe you picked up in the area since, I don't know, just in general, I guess about
Yeah.
writing, uh, science, or maybe even research?
Mm. I think for me, one thing that I learned very quickly and that everybody kept on telling me was don't be scared to ask questions that may make you look dumb. I think as a scientist, you're like, okay, I don't want to ask a question that may seem like I don't know what's going on. But as a journalist, the tables are turned because you want people to give you as much information as possible. And those questions can range from describe to me what an astrocyte looks like describe to me what the cell looks like. What does this protein look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? Those questions may seem very fundamental and very dumb per se, but I found that a lot of the answers to those questions are phenomenal because it forces a scientist to kind of think on another level. How do I explain this in a way that people can actually taste it, touch it, smell it, see it, like using imagery. So I think that is one thing that has been a lesson to learn, but is really fun when you put it into practice because you always get something really surprising. I think another thing that my editor actually told me, and is one of my favorite pieces of advice, is just don't be a jerk. Be humble, be kind, understand that, we're all human. Science is innately human and we're telling human stories. And so we should do that as such with compassion and empathy towards our subjects. And whether that is in writing the story or in interviewing somebody, interviewing a subject, I think just approaching it with humanity and humility too, I think is a lesson that I've also learned and that I've been very fortunate to have people tell me. So yeah, I think those are some tips and tricks. I honestly feel like in journalism, and in science as a whole, you figure out a lot of things by doing it yourself. I think that is really important. So I would also advise that, if you're really interested in this, just try it. Just pick up the pen, start writing, pitch an outlet, try to figure out a story, join an organization, and just see how it goes. And like me, you might find that you find yourself really sucked into it and that you really end up loving it. But you wouldn't have known that had you not tried it in the first place. So I think just putting yourself out there is a really important first step.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And also, I like that you brought up that science, and even, well, not even within science, but I feel like science and the STEM field in general kind of gets a bad reputation that it's like cold, technical, not very humane or compassionate. But I think especially maybe in science communication, you really see all of that like humanity kind of come out, and compassion within the field that maybe a lot of people overlook because of all the technical scientific jargon that we have to use when we explain things or like do our research. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
No.
So, I don't know. Do you have any other questions? Anything else you would like to say for people who might see this in the future?
Well, good luck. You got this. I'm rooting for you. I think that, JY again is a great organization and provides a lot of opportunities. So highly recommend to check that out at least. I loved my time at JY. I made a lot of friends and learned so much. So I think that is all. I mean, I would just wish anyone watching this good luck. Please reach out if you have any questions at all, or if you'd like to follow up. And we're rooting for you. I think the world needs more scientists and more science journalists. I don't think we'll ever have enough. So just wishing you all the best on your journey.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope that your book, you mention that your book was coming out?
Oh,
Um,
not my book, but not my
oh,
book, an article.
an article within a book?
It's an article about a book. So it's kind of
Oh, okay.
it's a fun interview. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I will definitely look out for that in the future. And I don't know. I hope you continue doing what you do, and good luck with your getting your PhD in your studies. That can't be easy.
Thank you, Phoebe. It was great to see you, and thank you for this opportunity.